time for another edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. And we're going to do a little story time this week here on the show, talking about rental property, investment, have it, not have it, all that coming up here on the show. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Phil and I here to talk about a little scenario breakdown. I feel like we need to have Led Zeppelin's communication breakdown playing in there, but I know we'd get dinged by YouTube, and then they wouldn't.
That's right.
They all do all that kind of stuff. So. Yeah, they wouldn't like that. But anyway, we're going to do a scenario breakdown, Phil, on rental property.
Right.
Have it. Get a Shakespeare here, or to be or not to be, to have or not to have.
Or not to be, yeah.
That's
Pros
right.
and cons.
That's right. So, first of all, you doing all right?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Doing good.
Now, do you have rental
property?
Way
through tax season. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you're probably right in tax season. Do you have rental property yourself?
Well, yes and no. So I do. I've got one residential, but my son, who is disabled, is who's the tenant.
Oh, okay.
So there's a whole purpose behind that, and then I own the building that we're in.
Gotcha.
So I am my landlord, my own landlord.
So when the check doesn't show up, you know who to go see.
That's right. I know who to go knocking on the door for. So.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good.
But beyond that, no. And we can kind of get into why pros and cons. So.
Yeah. Is that something you've had in your family, like your parents? Did they ever have?
Yes. Yeah. So my dad's was very heavily involved in it. At some point he had, I think it was upwards of 35 properties.
Oh, wow.
In Northern Michigan. I mean, that was his primary business. That's what he did.
Okay. Okay.
So
a good source to talk about this.
Yep. So I saw the good and the bad, both sides of it.
So let's say a potential client is retiring year two, whatever, right? Sure. And they've built a dream home, or they're building a dream home to move into, which people have, obviously housing prices have been out of control. But they're basically saying, hey, what do we do with this other house? Like, should we turn it into rental property? And that's really the scenario many retirees kind of find themselves in, I think, right? They especially if they want to snowbird it or something like that. And it's like, okay, do I keep this other place and rent it out? And, so I don't know. Let's talk about it a little bit. Pros and cons.
Oh, I mean, when you get into rental properties, the bottom line is it's all about cash flow. I mean, that is the key to owning rental properties. So a couple of things in looking at this, I mean, they mentioned the current house is paid off, right? So no mortgage on it, which to me is almost one of those, okay, that goes against good rental property strategies. Mm-hmm. Because again, it's about cash flow. So how much rent can I generate for equity that I have in? So typically when you own rental properties, it's about leveraging them. And there's definite dangers in leverage, in having a mortgage on a property.
Sure.
You've got to make sure you don't get yourself too leveraged to where if things aren't cash flowing, rent's not there, that you can still sustain it. But it gets you the best bang for the buck, So
right.
But let's back up just for a second and talk about, what's the attraction? Why do people want to do this? And really it's that attraction of, this concept of reoccurring income. Well, this is great. I mean, I've got let's call it a $400,000 house. It's what we grew up in with the kids and raised our family in, no mortgage on it. We're building our dream house, and maybe we're going to do a mortgage on that, and we'll just start renting this out because, hey, I can start generating, I don't know, $3,000 a month, let's say, or $2,000 a month, whatever it is. Pretty attractive. Which on its surface, yeah, it is. There's definitely a lot of potential benefits to rentals, but you just have to understand how this all works. Because number one, it's not going to be like that all the time. You're not going to get your rent every single month for 20 years, right? Talk to anyone that's owned rental properties, and they'll talk to you about the one of the biggest nightmares in rental properties is tenant turnover. Mm-hmm. Because you'll have
non-payment and then dealing with that. Non-payment. Look what we went through with COVID.
Whole nother stress. Yeah. Well, that's so for landlords. COVID was a disaster because the government said, "Hey, you don't have to pay rent."
Yeah.
And the landlord can't do anything about it. Well, okay.
But the bank still wanted the mortgage payment though, didn't they?
So yeah. So let's put you in that scenario. Let's say you had a house and that was your situation, that these tenants of yours decided, well, hey, government said we don't have to pay right now. Not that they relieved it, but they just didn't have to pay right now.
Right.
So, but to your point, if you had a mortgage where you still had to pay that, city county, they still want their property taxes.
Yeah.
The insurance company, well, they still want insurance. So there's all these different things that don't go away that you have to maintain.
And I know
And I
that's
mean, that's a real unique scenario.
yeah, I know that's a
Never
unique
happened
scenario, but
before.
you also, I've talked to people who are like, yeah, they didn't have to pay, rent for a year. And yeah, it was deferred, but then they just they just moved out before
Yep.
anything was due. And I never got the money anyway. So you got hosed out of a year's worth of money anyway.
Right. And now you get to the scenario of, oh, well, yeah, you owe this money. And so, yeah, you're entitled to it. Sure. So now you got to go to court. You get a judgment.
Yeah.
And that's a big, not a waste of time, but an expense and time suck if you're going to do it yourself, and you can do that. So again, this is back to my dad's scenario, right? He self-managed, which is one option to do. And there's pros and cons to it.
It's a rabbit hole.
So he self-managed, he went to all the court cases and got hundreds of thousands of dollars of judgments, collected very, very few of them because people just don't pay typically in that scenario. And obviously it depends on the class and who you rent to. And that, you get into all these different things of, okay, so what size of property do we have?
Mm-hmm.
The bigger, the nicer the property, chances are less likely maybe that you're going to have some problems, but not always.
Not always.
I mean, people don't pay at all different levels.
Right.
So there's a lot that goes into that. In this scenario, one of the things that really I was starting to think of is, and really to any rental property, you have to think of it is you can't get emotionally attached to the property. But if this was your house, right, you've raised your kids in it all your life.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So now you're going to rent this out. I can tell you from experience, again, through my dad, people don't treat a rental property like their own.
Of course.
Right. I mean, they generally are not kind to a rental property.
They're a little harder. They're a little rougher on the edges.
It's, hey, I'm paying for this. So let's, or whatever their mindset is. I don't know. But its bottom line is that they don't treat it like they own it.
And so you might have a problem. You might think you don't have a problem with that, but you do.
Yeah. You're emotionally attached to this house. If you go into, fix something and you say, well, you got a hole in the wall over here. What happened? Or you're not, cleaning the carpets or whatever it is. I mean, you have this emotional attachment to this house.
And then you got repairs coming up when they do. Right. And you got turnover repairs when they do move out. So yeah, right. For sure.
And so that's the other challenge with rentals and there's several tenant or landlords that I work with still that, have rental properties, good and bad experiences. The longer you can keep a tenant, the better, because now you don't have that turnover, because a turnover scenario can be a big problem.
Yeah.
Once you get that property back, if they've done any kind of damage to it, well, now you've got to get that fixed, because during that time, it's not generating rent. And now you've got to get it released again. So you might be down for a month, 2, 3, 4 months, depending on who's doing it.
Well, getting contractors right now, as we all learned, is tough.
So there's a lot of pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's looking at this saying, oh yeah, that's too much, I'll just hire somebody to do it. That's an option.
That's
you can hire a management
to take that off you talked about cash flow. So apply that to your cash flow.
So management companies, there's all sorts of different scenarios and how they work, but pretty typical is they, to find a tenant, they're going to charge you, a lot of times it's the first month's rent, so they'll do all the screening and everything and get the tenant in there, but they charge you 1 month's rent to do that. And you still have to pay all the advertising, but just for their work to get the tenant. And then beyond that, for them to quote unquote manage the property, and management simply means, hey, the toilet's backed up, right? If you want to get that call at 10 o'clock at night one night, then that's a management company. They'll get that call and then they'll contact somebody to fix it, the plumber to fix it.
Right.
But it's probably going to cost you 5 to 10% of your rents to do that for them to manage it. And that doesn't pay for the repairs. That's just their service.
Right.
To be the one that the tenant calls. Then you're going to get a bill from the plumber that says you owe X amount, for the toilet repair or whatever it is. So yeah. It's, not to again shed a bad light on rental. There's good and bad.
Okay.
I just, like any financial decision, right? You go into it eyes wide open, understanding pros and cons of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I am working with a potential client right now that they don't have rental properties. And then this isn't exactly their scenario, but they have some money in the bank and other non-taxable or taxable type investments, non-qualified money.
Mm-hmm.
that they're considering rentals, getting into rentals, because she's got an uncle that's in Seattle, so totally different market. And he's done very well in real estate. So she's talking about all these different ways to get into real estate.
It's very
So
appealing.
we're starting to have that discussion of, and she's looking at her uncle's experience, which again, you got to understand, okay, several different things going on. Number one, totally different market. I have
Yeah.
no idea what Seattle works like. I have some experience in this area, how it works, Michigan specifically, and pros and cons, because I've seen my dad go through it in Northern Michigan, but I've seen other clients go through the process of being a landlord in the Southeastern Michigan area. So,
Right.
so before you do it, make sure you talk to people, get both sides,
Yeah.
to
Yeah, for
understand,
sure.
hey,
Get the ups and the downs.
good, bad, it can be a very good way to generate some cash flow, but make sure that you're saving some of that, because you're going to have some downtimes where you're going to have to, you know, pay for the property taxes, whatever it is, the mortgage if you have it,
Hmm.
while you're finding a tenant, and make some, potentially some property repair. And then decide, is that something you want to do? How
Yeah.
involved do you want to be in this process? So,
Yeah, that's some
so
good points, right?
there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So,
It feels like there's more negatives, I guess, coming right out of the gate. But again, the positives obviously are, hopefully it's all about the cash flow there, right? It's all about, is
right.
it generating enough money to make some of those headaches or potential headaches worthwhile, right? And that's what you really have to
Yeah.
debate.
And there's pros and cons. So the negatives, I've seen the negatives. That's why I'm not in it. I'm like,
Right.
nope. There's better ways to make money.
Okay, and but
And
that's a fair point, right? So
right,
maybe if someone has that on their radar, but they are a little concerned that they can't maybe handle the stress of the negatives or whatever the case is, but they want to kind of figure out a way to invest, okay, fine. So in this our scenario we set up, you don't rent a house out. Now you sell the first home
right.
because you built your dream home, and then where do we put that money? Do we just put it all into the new home? And get it paid off
Mhm.
faster, or do we
Yep.
do some investment again? So it's all going to depend
And
on,
then that's part of the whole cash flow financial,
right.
analysis to see, okay, what's the right option for you?
Yeah.
And if rental is something you want to explore, then absolutely, let's look at rental, from kind of a perfect scenario, but then going into it, understanding, hey, here's what the potential downsides are.
Yeah.
So,
Very well.
I
Very
mean,
well.
to me, I think the rental properties, and again, this I'm biased, right? Just because
Right.
what I've seen and experienced with it. But to me, a rental property would be a really good fit for somebody that is a do-it-yourself, or like a home repair type of person, that they
Yeah.
enjoy that. They've
Yeah.
always fixed their own stuff at the house, the plumbing, the electrical. They're now retired from whatever their full-time job was, and they want something to do anyways.
Hmm.
They like to tinker. So I mean, hey, this will give you something to tinker.
Yeah.
You'll be getting calls, and you can do some fix up on houses and buy, and that's where you're going to get the better bang for your buck in these, is getting into properties that need some tender loving care to bring them up to a certain level. And that's where it gets real tricky too, because again, this isn't yours, so don't bring these properties up to a level that, oh, I'd like to live here, because
Yeah. True.
people are going to tear it up. you
Yeah.
know you
Yes.
might do that once and then
Serviceable.
realize, oh my
Yeah.
word, what in the world.
Yeah, I spent too much on that upgrade or whatever the case
Yeah,
is. So,
so
all right. Well, so an interesting, kind of take on whether you should do this or not. Obviously, got a little bit of a negative slant, but again, find the positives if you
there's
need it, but
yep,
really look at look at what moves the needle for you, right? At the end of the
right.
day, when it comes to any investment, whether it's being in stocks or being in an annuity or being in rental property or precious metals or whatever, or crypto, what moves the needle for all aspects of your life? Just don't put your eyes on the money and go, ooh, I could rent this house out for $3,000 a month, and that's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where most people look at it, as like, oh, in the tax side of it, right? Because you
Yeah.
get 3,000 a month, and then you get this quote unquote depreciation to write it off. So you're not paying tax on the whole three, which is very appealing.
Yeah.
But the thing I always remind people of is that depreciation deduction, you're just borrowing it, right? So because houses don't depreciate in value, at the end of the day, it's going to hopefully appreciate, if not at least keep the value.
Yeah. True.
So all this deduction, this depreciation you borrowed all these years, if you sell it, well, now you got a big tax bill. or you've got to get into a whole nother scenario. Well, how do I avoid that through what's called a 1031 and rolling it into, so I mean, there's a lot to rental properties, pros and cons.
Another little
So
animal there.
talk to somebody that knows all aspects of it to give you some good advice, not just the uncle that's had a great experience and you're just, hearing, oh yeah, this is the greatest way to make money. It is a good way to make money, but it might not be the right way for you.
Okay, so get some advice, get some math in there as well. And of course, as always, if you need some help, reach out to Phil. He's a CPA and a personal financial specialist, and of course, has a little bit of experience in this arena as well. And of course, if you need some help, you can find him online at philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. That's our podcast website, but it certainly redirects you as well. You can click on and go back to his main website. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, which if you're checking that out, you can just hit the little subscribe button there. And we'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Again, if you need to reach out to Phil, you can also call him at 248-888-7530, 248-888-7530. Numbers on the screen. And we'll see you next time here on the show.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.